Let's talk to the comedian, author, and sad to say, something of an expert in anti-Semitism, David Baddiel. Morning, David.
Hi, Stig. How are you?
Very good. I've followed you on Twitter, and I saw these tweets, and it felt that you were especially shocked and appalled by these particular messages of anti-Semitism by Wiley. Was that right, and why was that?
I don't know if I was particularly more shocked than I have been in the past. I guess it's more to do with the fact that, in my experience, there hasn't been someone with such an enormous platform who has come at Jews quite so blatantly before. But as you'll know, I have for a while been saying that there is an issue, I guess, with anti-Semitism, which is as a racism, it operates in a different way to other racisms in that it has a kind of dual attack in that although Jews can be called, vermin and thieves and lying and all the things that racists call the objects of their racism all the time, you can also describe Jews as in power and in control and controlling the world and secretly controlling politicians, and that creates a thing whereby anti-Semites can sometimes feel like and look like that they are punching up, that they are wearing the clothes of revolution and speaking out against the man, and all the sorts of things that on Twitter can feel like you're fighting the good fight. And this goes back a long way, and it's always been called the socialism of fools and whatnot. But so I've seen that quite a lot, but I don't think I've seen it quite so straightforwardly before.
Do you think that social media, a platform like Twitter, would have reacted differently if it had been a different type of racism? Do you think that their slowness to respond was connected with the fact this was anti-Semitism?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer because to some extent we're in a state of flux with that. Like, because Twitter have allowed an awful lot of, different types of discrimination to flourish on that platform for a long time. But recently that has changed. Recently there's been a spate of quite high profile suspensions for all sorts of reasons, for misgendering and for other types of racism or whatever. So I would say at the present time, they are pretty hot at suspending people who do offend in that way. And it seemed that in this particular case, they were being slow because Wiley wasn't just sending out the odd tweet, he was doing a sustained rant that got kind of worse and worse to the extent that by the time I saw it, he was actually retweeting Holocaust denial. He was retweeting people saying Jews are the most vile people in humanity and, saying the Holocaust never happened. And that is pretty, extreme to be understated about it. Nonetheless, in terms of the fact that generally you do get people essentially thinking of anti-Semitism as a kind of lesser racism, kind of a second-class racism, I have seen lots of other people essentially saying we don't really know what he said wrong. And that is because there is this sense that, that Jews get folded into a sort of class of white privilege whereby Jews are essentially part of the oppressor class, which is to do with a very complicated thing that is difficult to explain, but someone described it as Jews being Schrodinger's whites, whereby Jews are white and non-white depending on the politics of the observer. And in this case, there's a very strong sense, I think, from Wiley and his supporters, which he does have, that Jews essentially are just part of white privilege and therefore it's okay to say what you like about them. But that really misunderstands the terrible history of anti-Semitism.
David, I thought this was interesting because you said that there were some people saying, well, there's nothing wrong with what he said. And it kind of taps into this narrative, false narrative, obviously, that there are certain Jewish people within music and film management who are controlling things. And the reason I say that is because I remember Reggie Yates, the TV presenter back in 2017, had to apologize after he said that it's great on a podcast that music artists are no longer being managed by, quote, some random fat Jewish guy from northwest London. I mean, he had to apologize after that. And, and he...
Well, to be fair to Reggie, who I know, to say he had to apologise, Reggie did apologise and I think totally accepted that was a stereotype and that he was dealing with a negative stereotype that he knew in his own heart wasn't true. But I think that I spoke to Reggie about that, actually, and I said to Reggie, what you've got to consider is if someone else had said to you about a black person and used a similarly negative stereotype
Yeah.
publicly, how would you feel about it? And he totally accepted that he would feel really angry and upset and offended about that. And it's a kind of dull, in a way, thing that you have to do all the time as a Jew, which is to say, how would this look? How would this feel
Yeah.
if it was another minority being described in similarly negative way? I have to say,
But
not in a similar way,
yeah.
because no other minorities generally are being talked of as being in control of the world or, filthy rich or whatever else it might be. That's very Jewish. What I mean is equivalently offensive, not necessarily in an exactly equivalent way.
The thing I also saw, which is another issue around this, is that as soon as someone starts commenting about Jewishness, people start mentioning the word Israel, even though
Yeah.
Wiley didn't appear to mention Israel at all from what I could see, and yet it gets conflated with people saying, well, I disagree with what Israel's done.
Yeah, well, that's obviously a very reflex thing that happens when Jews get talked about negatively as people start bringing in Israel in a way. That's also part of a way of making them clearly the oppressors and clearly having power because Israel, is a powerful entity. One thing that needs to be said about that is there is this movement called the Black Hebrew Israelites, which I think Wiley was slightly taking his lead from in some respects, in that he started talking about Israel being a land that belongs to black people. And I'm not going to get into what his historical beliefs are with that, but it is dangerous because Jersey City, 5 people got shot in December by a group allied to the Black Hebrew Israelites. And at the end of the day, what is very, very important here is that all minorities suffer racism, suffer discrimination. And what happens when minorities turn on each other and start saying, well, you're actually the oppressors, or we're more oppressed than you, and there's a league table and a hierarchy of victimization, is the only people who benefit from that are the racists and the discriminators, because division just means that we can't speak out against the people who are really creating the problems.
David Baddiel, thank you very much.
David, before you go, are you going to walk out from Twitter at 9:00?
Sorry, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Are you joining in this walkout from Twitter at 9:00?
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure about it because I always think it's better to keep talking, but I think I might quietly stay off it for a bit.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Somewhere between the two.
Thank
David
you.
Baddiel, thank you very much for coming on, comedian and author there. This year, there's a boycott starts in 55 seconds.
For 48 hours.
For 48 hours.